3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait You Haven't Seen. It's a show where we talk about movies, and specifically talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, aka TV's Travis. This is episode number 202, and our movie this week is from 2009 called Fish Story. And here to talk with me about it, because he loved the movie and made me watch it, it's Myles from The More You Nerd. Myles, how you doing, man?
I'm fantastic. I'm kind of evangelical about this film. I made my co-host Drew watch it for The More You Nerd, and he was really excited when he found out that we were doing this. And I can't wait to talk about this one because it's one that I don't think a lot of people have seen. It's really under the radar. Like even in like the Japanese like film scene, this one does not get talked about a lot. And I feel like it's my job to make people watch this one.
Okay, so you brought this movie up. Here's my history with Fish Story prior to watching it for this episode. You brought it up a couple of weeks ago as, hey, have you heard of this movie Fish Story? And I'm like, no, I had not heard of it at all. I knew nothing about it, going into it completely blind. So what I want to know is, what's your history with it? How did you stumble upon it, or was it shown to you by somebody?
No, that's exactly how I discovered it. So I follow some screenwriters on Twitter, and someone had mentioned a story or a film about a punk rock song that saved the world, about this like esoteric Japanese film that no one had seen. And I made it my mission to find it, because I was like, this is 100% the kind of movie I would like to see. And 9 times out of 10, when that kind of thing happens, it tends to be a little disappointing. And that was not the case with this one. This was just a happy accident, and it became immediately one of my favorite movies.
So I read the synopsis, and it's basically what it says. It's a punk rock song saves the world in 2012. Interconnected stories. I'm like, okay, let's. I just sat down and watched it. I had a great time with this movie. This movie was super fun. I was drawn back to. And it's a completely different film, but Amy Frost brought Amelie to me a couple of years ago, and I had not seen that. I knew of Amelie. I had heard of it. I had seen the box art countless times, but I knew nothing else about it, and I sat down and watched that, and I fell in love. That movie was just adorable and fantastic. And I had a very similar sort of emotional reaction to this movie. Like, I sat down, I started watching it, and at first I'm like, okay, this isn't so bad. Yeah, I'm kind of getting into this. And the music was great, but as this movie unfolded and more started happening, something in it clicked, and I was just like, this is fantastic. And I can't articulate an exact reason why. Like, I can't tell you it's this great writing or these great characters or anything, but there's something about the sum of the parts. The sum is greater. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
So, did you grow up being a fan of music at all?
Absolutely,
like,
love music.
So, do you remember when you were a kid or like a teenager, and you brought your CDs or records or whatever over to your friend's house to, like, not to show off, but like, hey, this is what I'm listening to. You should check this out. This feels like stumbling across that like one faded record that you hadn't heard, that someone showed you. And this is this beautiful mixtape love letter to everyone who has picked up an instrument and did something creative with it. And there is something very punk rock about the story itself.
Yes.
And especially with the characters, like that mantra, it'll never sell, and like laughing and being like, that's fine. And unfortunately, the movie was fated to have the same history as the song itself.
Mm-hmm.
It only very recently got a Blu-ray release by a British imprint called Third Window Films.
Okay.
And if you're interested in buying it, it's this version, and it's playable in American systems because
Oh,
it
excellent.
says it's region B. I contacted them because I mean I had a library copy on DVD, like I bought from a library. And when I saw this was announced, I was like, I'm gonna buy it anyway for posterity's sake. But I contacted Third Window and asked if it would play in American players, and they said, yeah, it says Region B, but it's actually Region Zero.
Okay. That's awesome.
And I've tested it on my PlayStation and my Xbox, so it works.
That's great because
And
I do feel like this is finding this movie at first. You mentioned it, and then it kind of went out of sight, out of mind for a week or two, and I didn't think about it.
right.
And then the weekend was coming up, and I'm like, all right, I got to get ready to watch the movie. And I'm thinking, where am I going to watch this? So I start searching like my normal search areas,
And
like they don't even
contact you because I could have hooked you up.
and like they don't even have it listed on a couple of these,
Nope.
and
No.
all. And I ended up finding somebody put it on. I think it was archive.org. There's a full version of it there. And but with a title like Fish Story, I was like, is this the right movie or not? So I started watching it, and I had the IMDb page up, and I had a couple of the screen caps, and I was just watching until I saw something that looked like one of the screen caps. I'm like, okay, there we go, we got the movie, so I'm fine. And you mentioned how it like the story gets very punk rock, and that was one of those things when you start dealing with the band, because describing this movie doesn't do it any justice, right? Because you can sit here and describe it. Yeah, that is a perfect word for it. And because not only are they kind of disparate stories that are loosely interconnected, and interconnected loosely is the proper term there, but they're so different in tone in what they're giving you. And so it's very much a mixtape. But when we got to the stuff with the band, and remind me how the band's name is pronounced, because I'm going to get it wrong, I'm sure.
It's Genkirin, I think.
Okay. But we
I
started.
often get it wrong, so don't worry.
I'm gonna butcher all sorts of names tonight, so just bear with me, please. Faye in the chat room, who speaks a little bit of Japanese, is going to tear me apart for it, and you know what? That's fine. It's fine. But we get to the band, and their story was so punk rock, right? It's 1975. We get to see them playing at like this dinner club, and nobody wants to hear their music at all.
It looks like the best show ever, too.
It really does. It looks so awesome. And there's like everybody's yelling at him, play slower song. Nobody wants to hear punk rock in Japan in 1975. Nobody. And
It exists.
And that scene was great because they're playing their song, and the like maitre d' or somebody comes up and tries to get them to slow it down and calm it down. And the bass player, Shigeki, finally like looks angry and just kind of walks over in the middle of the song and then kind of stops playing. And so they regroup and they start playing a very slow ballad. And they make it like 30 seconds, a minute into this ballad. And the guitar player and the bass player, they're having none of it. And they start kicking back into their punk rock. And it's so good. I mean, he even flipped his pedal off and he's playing clean, no distortion on the guitar. And then all of a sudden he's just like, nope, stomp on that pedal and start going. And the people get pissed off at them, so they just stage dive. Like, I love Shigeki just running out there, drops his bass, runs all the way, and just dives on that guy.
My favorite is the way that the drummer always smiles. It's that one character that's like, that seems to be aloof, but always has that knowing smile, and he's so fantastic.
Honestly, favorite member of the band was the drummer. There was something
100%.
about him, because he was just like, that's perfect. He's aloof. He's always he's there, but not quite always fully there. And you can tell. Then you find out later on he's got like 7 kids at home. And it's like, okay, now it makes sense.
When he talks about being called a talentless loser, and then he points to himself and then he points to both people, and like he doesn't understand, but also is like, this is stupid. What I love about that whole thing is because the movie kind of stops to tell the story of the band. It becomes like a band biopic of a band that never existed for about 30 minutes. And it's the perfect way to tell this story, because you have this cool like mixtape of stories. And I love this mixtape of stories because some of it is very Super Sentai-ish, you
Yeah.
know, with the Champion of Justice story, but you also have one that like feels like an urban legend horror story.
And
And
honestly, okay.
I
All
love
right.
that so much.
Okay, so let's talk about these mixtape stories, and then we'll come back to the band because
Mhm.
it starts us off. The first story is like 1982, and it's a couple guys are out and they're riding along in the car, and their friend or somebody is driving, but they're going through these tapes, and he starts talking about like these kind of urban legends on these tapes of these songs, and the one in particular is Fish Story, and they tell you the story of the minute long muted gap in the song. And that whole thing, like horror is the perfect way to put that because it felt like a Japanese horror film in so many
It
parts of
does.
that. And I kept waiting for like things to happen. And we got the tape sort of going into the tape player, which was a little strange, but like I just kept waiting for more. Like I was tense that whole time, waiting for more
No,
things to happen.
the first time I watched that film, I was like waiting for, because I'm a big J horror person, so
Mhm.
I was waiting for something to happen. I was waiting for him to look behind the car because they had that great shot of the entire highway in the dark, and I was waiting for someone in white to just be like standing there.
Yeah.
And so when he hears that scream and it's not that situation, I liked it even more because it was subverting the trope. Because apparently this director has done a lot of the kind of not found footage, but like that kind of POV horror stuff,
Okay.
and like for I think Japanese television. And I can definitely see that because the way that whole thing is framed is as a horror story, and what shows, I think, to me, the real skill as a director is it feels also different from every other story he's telling. Like when he does
Yes.
the Champion of Justice story, it does not feel the same, and it's not shot the same. And I really appreciated that kind of feeling of I'm getting a mixtape of stories. And for me, I'm also a big fan of urban legends
Mm-hmm. Oh
and
yeah.
using those for genre storytelling. And so like this thing was like tailor made for me.
Well, it was great because it starts off. You get a little bit of this, like oh, they're playing the tapes, and they talk about there's the minute long gap in the song, and there's the story that it must have been something happened, or if you have a sixth sense, you hear a woman screaming on the tape, but most people
Right.
don't. And you've got kind of the guy that's driving them around is very put upon, and the one dude treats him terribly, and they meet up with some girls, and he's just almost forgotten, and like to the point where the guy even says he's not even here, he's just our driver. um
Yeah, the relationship between him and everyone else is very weird because he says that, but it also seems like that kind of like one friend who goes along with everything
yeah.
just to be included. That was the vibe I kind of got from him.
Yep, I did too. And but as that scene moves on, and then like somehow something supernatural gets mentioned, and the girl's like, oh, she's really into that. And so she starts talking about like premonitions, and she's telling that guy that
Hmm.
he's fated to meet a woman that night. And all this stuff is going on, and it keeps building this almost dread throughout the whole thing. And it was so well done, and we don't get the payoff of what happened in that moment when he runs in. So he's driving along when he stops right in front of the tunnel, which by the way was that shot I just loved. I love that.
It's fantastic.
And how often do you see a bridge that goes right into a tunnel like that? It looked so odd to me, but I like at the same time it looked amazing. Um
I see it. Oh, so my mom lives in Tennessee, so they're going up 26 from South Carolina. You do go through a tunnel very much like that, but if you stopped, you would cause an absolute horrible accident.
oh yeah.
It's not a regular road, but I do see that when I go up to see my mom. So it's cool to see that in a regular context.
Hmm.
Um,
But yeah, I love like he stops there and then he hears something, and you're right. There's that whole thing where you keep waiting for him, like when he looks behind himself for something to be there. But then he
mhm.
stumbles upon uh, a bicycle that's down, and then you see a car, and the doors open and like the lights are on, and all this stuff. And when he gets up there, and then he sees a woman, a young girl being assaulted,
Hmm.
And at first, because the character has been to this point very like reluctant to stand up. He doesn't stand up for himself. He shies away from conflict. But it's when that ends where he grabs the tree branch and you hear the song start to come back up and he goes running in, and then we cut away from it. We don't see what ends up happening there, which I thought was very interesting to do that and kind of leave
Until
us
the very end
hanging.
of the film.
Yes. And so you're right. Then like that's such a good sort of J-horror style, everything shot that way, the framing, the pacing, all of that. And then we go to a different story and it's done differently, but it's not like overly stylized either. It's very subtly different. And I love that. I loved the stuff on the boat. The Champion of Justice story was great for all the reasons that was different from the first one.
And it's really fun because so Drew and I have been watching a lot of tokusatsu on The More You Nerd recently, like a lot of Ultraman and a lot of Kamen Rider.
Mm-hmm.
And it does, I mean, and Kamen Rider's name checked in this film, as are Go Rangers. They're actively shown, which is Super Sentai, what would become Power Rangers.
Yep.
But I really liked that this kind of felt like an episode of Kamen Rider. Like it's shot in a very similar fashion. And even the bookending stuff with the kids in the music store feels like Clerks.
Yeah.
Like it has that kind of more handy cam style where it's like very realistic looking, and it sets the whole like, hey, a comet's coming to Earth and there's 1 hour left.
Yeah.
And that's our time frame for this entire film. And I always hate talking about films that have multiple vignettes of stories that are interconnected and likening it to Pulp Fiction. But to me, this is the most successful film that I've seen do this since Pulp Fiction.
Now, I am a big fan of anthologies. I love a good horror anthology or sci-fi anthology. But those are always sort of a thing where they're disparate stories. And they're meant to just be short stories collected into with maybe a framing device. This, you're right. I think that this is much more akin to like a Pulp Fiction. These stories aren't directly connected until you find out how they're directly connected.
Right.
And then it's like, oh, wow, that's a cool way. Like, and I liked it because I started putting those pieces together, but not in the same way. Like I was making connections that weren't there, but I thought might be there. But like, and it was just
fun because
yeah.
The movie doesn't punish you for doing that because it's like, oh, that's a cool idea, but like when you see it, you're like, oh, this is fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really
and
is.
I think this movie also lives and dies by the fact that the song is phenomenal.
It is an earworm of the highest order, and it's such a well done song, and it's such a good punk rock song.
I think if it wasn't, this movie would not feel as effective. Like I love everything about the movie, but without the song Fish Story being as good as it is, it doesn't hold the same power. But when you watch the band's story and their effort to get this song made, it makes you just really root for them. You root for the song. And when you've heard this song like 4 or 5 times by the time they actively perform it in the studio. But even when they do that, you're not sick of it. And you're kind of like, when they have this whole thing where they're going against the producer who's telling them to slow it down and make it a ballad, and they're just rocking out knowing it's the last time they're going to ever record together, you feel empowered and you're excited to watch them perform this song. And then you get what fills the moment of silence, which I thought was awesome.
So the band stuff was great because you first meet them and they're just trying to do something. And the manager guy sees them at that show we referenced earlier, and he's like, I think you guys got something great here. I think, let's work. Let me be your manager. Your music's going to change the world type of thing. And then we cut to like a year later, and they're supposed to be making a record, but you're right. The producer, and this is that same thing where punk rock doesn't exist. And so this producer's like, nobody wants to listen to that. They want, slower songs. They want something that they're overdubbing their song with like a piano and all this stuff. And the guys are sitting there just hating it because it's not what they want to do. And then you learn later on that they're basically going to get dropped. And I loved how that whole scene played out, because here they are sitting on like it was like not a pier, it was like along a river or something.
Yeah, it's
Like
like
a
a little
causeway.
yeah.
And drummers shoveling noodles in his face, which was great. He's always eating.
I love that fried noodles keep coming up for him.
Yeah. But he's always eating fried noodles, but he's never eating them according to Goro the singer, right? Like he's always like,
Right.
those your
That's
fried
so
noodles
fun.
aren't fried, or you don't fry udon noodle, like all this stuff as he's going on. And he's like, he just doesn't care. He just offers him some and then goes back to eating. But the guitar player's getting all disenfranchised because the producer's a jackass and he doesn't like him, and this, that, and the other thing. And then we learn that the record company's going to drop them. That they've got one more. They're going to let them put out their one record and then get rid of them. And that next scene where Shigeki goes home with his girlfriend and the manager's there either waiting for them or shows up. I think he shows up right after they get there.
Both, maybe, I think.
Something. But that scene, as it played out, I was like, it was an emotional hit, because I've now had this whole scene with the band, and I've grown to love these guys. Like, these characters
I would watch an entire full-length film about the band itself.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then the manager sits down and is like, yeah, poor Goro, he has to lose you guys but keep going, type of thing. And Shigeki had no idea that was going on, because Goro was the one that told him that, but he left that part out. And it felt like he left it out because he didn't want to take anything away from the band itself. Like, it's how I how I read that, was like,
yeah, no, I don't see Goro as the kind of person who is trying to betray the band, which is what his girlfriend's worried about.
Yes.
I think that he didn't want to poison their last session, because he still has a decision to make, and we don't know the end decision of that. We're never told, if he goes on to do a solo thing or not. But I get the impression that he I don't know, because he has this whole soliloquy in the middle of his recording session after the guitar solo, which is where the silence comes from, because they decide to just cut it out. And I love that, because it felt like, man, if this band really existed, if this thing actively happened, this is exactly how it would play out.
Oh,
it feels like the best punk rock story.
And yeah, it was so punk rock, because that's such a punk rock move in the middle of the recording, knowing it's their only chance, because they have been told you get one chance to record this song, one take, and that's it. And in the middle of that recording, he just goes on this spoken word soliloquy of like, well, what if nobody listens to this? Why wouldn't they? This is a great song. Like, he's doing all this, and his bandmates.
I love that. Who wouldn't listen to a song so good? It's so great. I love that scene.
And his bandmates are just loving it, and they're going with it, and the song gets done, and they're riding high. They love it, and the producer's like, we can't do anything with this. We got to do another take. And this is where it gets super punk rock. Is the manager's like, no, we were told we were doing one take. That's it. That's what we're doing. And he's like, well, we got to do something. We got to rebuild that or whatever. No, just mute it. Just cut it out of there. And like, what do you say? It's going to be weird. And the producer's like, they're not the Beatles. They can't get away with this. He's like, who cares? We don't care.
It's not going to sell anyway.
It's not going to sell. And that's such a punk rock attitude of like, we're just going to do what we want to do because we want to do it. We don't care. We don't care if it sells or not. It's not gonna. So let us do this dumb thing. And I love that. And I love that he had the book and he kind of wrote all the lyrics out of that book. And everyone's like, oh, that's plagiarism. No, it's borrowing it. And the manager's like, don't worry about the rights. It's not a problem.
We're gonna worry now because you said not to worry.
Exactly. And then you end up with that scene as they're all sitting around after the recording, and they're talking, and the four band members just talking about kind of what happened and how you can tell they're still like riding high on how that went and that recording, and they start waxing philosophical about that book and about where it came from and all this when the manager shows up with his son. And then to get the like brought to our attention that, oh yeah, the book is just a bunch of gibberish. Like, it's dumb. It makes no sense. Meanwhile, Shigeke is like getting into the deepness of this, and then to find like just yeah, it was a horrible translation done like out of a dictionary word for word by somebody who lied about being able to do a translate. It's so good, and it just keeps like layer upon layer keeps coming off of this, and I'm like, this is getting more brilliant by the moment. To then title it Fish Story, and it's a song that's had these urban legends built around it starting in the 80s, and then the guy at the record store in present day in 2012 is talking about it and talking about the history behind it and all this kind of stuff.
Which the visual information that we're given, to me, leads us to believe that the little kid in the bar watching Go Rangers is supposed to be the guy at the record store.
Okay, so I was curious about that. Was he the one in the record store, or was he the put upon driver kid? Because I kind of got the feeling of both of those.
So the put upon driver kid,
was that just a random?
I think it's just a random guy. I never even thought about him as an option of being the put upon driver kid, because that's 1982, right? So that would have been about what, 6 years later?
Yeah, I guess he wouldn't have been old enough yet. So it doesn't really track, does it? I
mean, honestly, he's a little too old to be, because if he's 6 in 1975, he should probably be older than he is in 2012.
Maybe, but if
the film cuts away, makes it look like you're supposed to believe that kid grows up to run this record store.
Yeah, that was my first impression, was that was the fact. And then I was, as the rest of it unfolded, I was kind of trying to figure out if maybe it was supposed to be the put upon driver kid, but if that was 1982, then the timeline doesn't quite match up. And honestly, the record store guy, if he doesn't have gray hair, he could be anywhere from 30 to 60. We don't.
That's absolutely true. Yeah,
you never know. But just the way that whole scene unfolds, where they're talking about the book and the song and the band and the manager, and then the manager's like, yeah, it's just a bunch of bull. And Shigeke goes from like really being into the idea to suddenly he gets all distraught. He's like, it takes all the wind out of my sails. But then the rest of the band's like, no, it's great. Fish Story's perfect. Like, it makes perfect sense. And he comes back around, and they all embrace this idea that like naming the song Fish Story and coming up with whatever reason they want to have that mute thing in there, that minute of mute silence, to create a fish story out of their song is so good. And the fact that Shigeke didn't know what a fish story really was, and he had to be told that, like, yeah, it's a fake story. And so his immediate thing is like, well, I don't want my song to be like a lie. I'm like, no, it's not a lie. You just embellish the story. You make something up that started with a kernel of truth, and it grows into something more, and then that's what the song ended up doing anyway.
Right, and they go on to actively explain the plot of the movie within the movie.
Oh god, it was so good. It was so great, and and then finding out that the put upon kid who was being treated like crap by his friends and was told by this girl that he was going to meet somebody and whatnot, finally stands up for himself, and then meets that girl. They have a son who he trains to be the champion of justice, which, again, that whole scene on the boat starts. And what I loved is all these little vignettes. Yeah, these little vignettes, it's funny because they'll start one way and then they'll turn on you. And like the one on the boat, it starts off, it's on the ferry, and so there's all the school kids running around and whatnot, and you see the girls sit down, and then everyone's getting off the boat, and I was like, oh no, she didn't get off the boat. And sure enough, there she is sleeping on the boat. So now she's all upset, and you got like the one guy who immediately, by the way, that first guy she talks to, I was like, oh, I don't like him.
You automatically get bad guy energy from him.
Yeah, that smile was too perfect. It was too smarmy. But when the hospitality guy comes and brings her the first fruit tart, and the guy's like, no, sorry, I ordered that, thank you. And he's like, oh, and he just takes it from her. but then comes back a few minutes later with something else and just wants to sit down and start telling her his life story out of nowhere. And so it's like this just goofy little scene in this moment with these two kids. He's probably what, early 20s maybe?
Yeah, and he's a goofy looking guy too.
Yeah, he's a little goofy looking. She's, probably like 16, 17, I think is what she's supposed to be, because they're talking about her going to university, so right around that age. And they're just having this conversation, and then all of a sudden the boat gets hijacked. And the hijack of the boat is the guys from the scene just before that with their weird, like, end of the world cult. Which I was like, okay.
When he does his fighting pose with the apple tart, it's so great.
Yeah, after he's told her how he's trained his entire life to be a champion of justice, and it really does come off as like this guy's just full of hot air, but he's telling her a story anyway. And then for that scene to play out where they've got all the guys are hijacking the boat, they've got everybody at gunpoint, and he comes out of the kitchen with the apple pie. And his fighting pose while holding the plate of apple pie is so good. And then he just goes to town on him. Suddenly it becomes like a superhero movie, and it's shot just like that. Again, there's that that subtle change in the way that things are produced. And now we're using shots and angles and all this and wicked choreography. And I'm watching it and I'm thinking, okay, at some point he's going to get shot, like he has to, right? They're going to subvert that in some way. And they did. But then he doesn't give up anyway. Like, he's strapped to that chair, and he just decides to get out of it somehow. I don't even know how he did that, but he's a champion of justice. He's trained, so.
Yeah, you're led to believe that he like somehow like is super jointed and just did what he did. Like, cause you hear him like kind of like bend his bones or whatever, because you hear all the cracks and stuff, but. They don't do they don't actively like show what he's doing, which is fine. Like I can suspend that belief. I mean, I watch enough Kamen Rider, Power Rangers, Ultraman, Super Sentai. Like, I watch enough of that to where I'm like, I can go down.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
I love the line, the bullet went straight through, so it doesn't count as a wound.
Yes.
Like he's like, oh, it went straight through. It's not really a wound. I'm like, no, bro, you're wounded.
Yeah, you're wounded, and it's no good. And I did gloss over, and I forgot, there was the short scene where the really kind of jackass guy that was treating him like crap, treating the one driver dude like crap.
Oh yeah.
And his friend joined this like end of the world cult for 1999. That ended up being, of course, crap. But the other two sort of bishops, I don't know what you would call them, members of that cult, like kind of.
They are leading the charge for their new Noah's Ark. That's why they hijack the ferry. Whereas the one guy who we haven't mentioned, who is kind of the star of the bookend initially, as we see this guy kind of in a little scooter.
Yep.
Going through an abandoned city alleyway, and comes across this record store, and because he says that he has predicted this is going to happen.
Yes.
He says something like a blonde-haired prince is going to cause the end of the world, or something in that degree.
Yeah, and it's basically, it was an allegory for a comet. He even says that at one point. And it took me a minute to realize that was the same person.
Yeah, because they do his hair a little different.
Yeah,
and he like I guess did other things afterwards. I love how these stories intersect. I love how like you find out that, because at the very end of the film, the comet is destroyed, even though it had an infinitesimal like percentage chance of succeeding. They tell you that at the very beginning of the film. But the person who calculated that was the girl who was saved on the boat, who was raised by the father, who was the guy who meets the girl when he's, when we find out is that he saved he kind of helped save the girl who was being assaulted. She kind of saves herself.
Yeah.
But they fall in love and have the champion of justice, who ends up saving her who ends up saving the world.
Yeah.
And by proxy, Fish Story, a punk rock song, saves the world. And I love the message of that because, you know, I think that was kind of the promise of the internet age in a sense, where there were so many artists, so many bands who were amazing and had one, two, maybe even just an EP worth of material actively out for the public before they called it a day or had to call it a day. And some of those acts made some of the best music you'll ever hear, and unfortunately just didn't work out. And now we are in a fortunate position where we can actively kind of rediscover some of this stuff. I mean, I'm sure you have the same thing where like you have this one band who like you can't believe wasn't bigger than they were. Maybe they had an album, maybe they had two, but they made some of the best music you've ever heard.
Yeah. Actually, I'm trying to find the one that I'm thinking of right now because there was a song by a group. There was a little bit punk rock, a little bit kind of alternative rock, early 2000s. I will find it here in a minute, but I could not believe they didn't have a bigger career than they did. I think they only did one album. But I loved that. I just loved how this movie unfolded and more would happen. I love when movies do that anyway. Like it's fun when and it doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be some sort of a mystery or murder mystery or anything like that. It's just things unfold and you start to learn more, and these disparate stories start to fall into place in a way that yes, it's a little silly, but also like it totally works. It 100% like I buy all of it. I buy that A led to B led to C, and it's just cool to then get the parts, the connecting pieces as it goes, and then have it all tied up with that band and that song and the way that the song evolved throughout the movie. Because it starts off, you learn about it, and it's like, yeah, this is one of the earliest punk rock songs, right? It's like a year before the Sex Pistols, and then it's an urban legend. But then as you go along and you learn more and more, the song becomes just sort of a thing that happened, but it was almost like fated to happen. And these guys in this
Yes.
band just wrote a hell of a song and then made it into more than it was with this attitude they had of like, well, it's never going to sell anyway, so we can just do whatever we feel like. It was, oh, I loved that.
I think because every segment is played straight, but specifically because they do this whole like pit stop to give you a biopic of a band that never existed.
Mm-hmm.
And you get this intimate portrayal of a group of young men at a crossroads. Like, do they remain true to who they are, or do they compromise their vision to a spoiled producer in hopes that maybe they make a little money? And the fact that they give this authentic dedication to like the fierce independent spirit that fanned the flames of punk to begin with, I think is what makes this movie work, is the fact that this is a genuine love letter to not just genre and not just music, but that independent spirit, that creative hope, that even if you're a little left of center, the fact that if you stick with your vision and see it through, that at some point it's going to matter to somebody. And I think that fierce hope is such a beautiful thing that this movie delivers so well.
Yes. Yes, it absolutely does. It does it in a way that I haven't seen in a while either. And I certainly haven't had that experience while watching a movie, like feeling that kind of fierce hope. And so, and having it on a background of punk rock is perfect. It really
Yeah, I mean
is.
that's certainly a thing for me, and I mean it didn't matter if it was punk rock or not, but just because it's punk rock makes it a little more special for me.
Yeah.
Like I was one of those kids who was like finding that kind of stuff, and then obviously in '94 I discovered Green Day, and they became my favorite band, and I found other things and went back and listened to the Germs and Stiff Little Fingers and stuff like that, but like I think that stuff like this, films like this, and there's another Japanese film that I'm probably gonna have to make you watch, called One Cut of the Dead, that is equally as beautiful as this in a different way. Um,
I've heard of that
This
one.
this
That's the one where
yeah,
they're
this movie.
making One Cut of the Dead is where
Mhm,
they're
mhm.
making a zombie movie, right?
I mean, I'm not going to say anything because, like this movie, the less you know, the better.
Sure, but like that's
Um,
the that
yes,
that's
yes,
what I know
yeah,
of it is like it's people making a movie. So it's like a movie
yeah.
within a
It's
movie.
This is a movie. So when Drew and I took about a year and a half off of the More You Nerd, and when we came back, unfortunately the pandemic started, and so we decided to do a month dedicated to comfort food movies. And I
Sure.
made Drew watch this because this is one of my comfort food movies because nothing makes me feel better. Like even if the world's on fire, I know that there are expressions like this that exist, and I feel like you know with there's so much toxicity in the ether.
Hmm.
This film has that kind of hopefulness that infects you for days,
It really
and kind of kind
yeah.
of kind of like a really like infectious chorus, like a great song. Like it just gets in your head.
It's got a hook and that
And
hook
yeah,
grabs you and then like a good like again, music is such a great background to use for this because a good song will have that hook and it will pull you in.
right.
And then the more you listen to it, the more you get out of it. And you start finding new stuff within that
Hmm.
song or within that band. And then maybe it goes from that song to that band to that genre and you start branching out and hearing other bands and things like that. That's what this movie does. It's got this hook and it pulls you in. And it's a for me this was like a surprising uh comfort film because I can easily see myself kind of coming back to this as something like I need to unwind and watch something that's just gonna make me feel good. And like this is a movie
Hmm.
that would do that. Amelie is another one, and I think that's why I had those
Oh yeah.
parallel feelings to it was because I didn't expect either of these movies to be like I genuinely like movies, and so I just like a good story being told. And it takes a
Right.
lot for me to be like I can't watch that movie ever again, but it's one thing to kind of like a movie and it was another thing to have a movie kind of hit me in these different levels to the point where I was just like, ooh, I really dig this and I want more. Like I want to watch it again and I would totally watch an entire biopic of that band.
Yeah. I
And
would. I would too.
so I did find, by the way, the band that I was talking about, it was a band called Angerica, and they had a song out in the early 2000s. They were only active as a band for about 6 years, but they had this song out called "The Smell," and it's this kind of little bit punk rock, slightly hard rock song, and it's just this really catchy tune. And I never heard anything else from them, and it surprised me because that song was so good that you just expected to like hear more. Um, and
Yeah. That kind of thing happens, and
it does.
it bums me out because as many. I mean, I follow plenty of bands that I love, and I'm happy that I've had long lives. But there are so many bands that I've like, oh man, they only had one album, and like no one ever heard them,
Yeah.
or it feels like no one ever heard them. Like there is a emo adjacent band called Lola Ray that
Mhm.
was really good in the mid 2000s. They made one record and nothing happened. Um, and I mean, there are so many bands that I've become huge fans of, and they kind of disappeared, or their lead singer decided he wanted to make films in South America and has never been seen again. Which was there's a metalcore band I used to listen to called Sense by Man from Milwaukee, I think,
Mm.
or Wisconsin, that they they broke up after releasing their best record. That stuff happens, and so it's kind of cool to see this love letter to not just music, but also every band that didn't get their due. Everyone that put out a creative effort and weren't understood in their time period. And so not only is this movie excellent, just a good film.
Mhm.
It's a
Mhm.
feel good film, and especially when I was watching it early in pandemic, it made me feel great. But it's layered in such a way that it works as a mixtape. It works as a love letter to music, in a way that a lot of films that are supposed to be love letters to music don't.
Right.
I don't know why the one that popped in my head is High Fidelity, which is, you know, everyone's go-to in like film about music.
Mm-hmm.
And even though that movie has a killer soundtrack and some good blurbs, there's a lot about music that doesn't really land in
And I
that film.
think
It's a rom-com that's disguised as a Clerks like about music.
yes,
in a sense.
that's a good way to put it, because it's a rom-com first, and
Mhm.
and music is secondary to the rom-com aspects of it. It's important,
Right.
but it's not the main thing. This was like, this put music and structure of music kind of at the forefront of what's going on. And without it, like, you could take the music part of High Fidelity out and give it a different hook, and you're going
It's
to have
more or less
basically
the
the
same
same
movie.
movie. Yeah. You can't take the music part of this movie out of it and have anything close to what you get. You can't, even changing the band, I think, would make a huge difference, because
Yeah, I agree.
there's
Like, it's so integral to the absolute structure and narrative of the film
Mhm.
that removing any element disrupts everything.
Yeah, because punk rock at its core is very counterculture, very, very counter establishment, I should say. And it's very
Yeah.
much of like, just giving the middle finger to people that tell you can't do something, and doing it because, yes, I can. Like, somebody's
Yeah.
saying, you can't, you don't know how to play guitar. Yeah, I do. Johnny Ramone might have only known how to play 3 chords at a time, but he could play the hell out of those chords, And
Hey, look, I'm wearing the T-shirt of a band that made a career off 3 chords.
yeah, exactly. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And so to have that type of band be the backbone of this narrative, and then because the movie starts off, that framing device in the record store, you got the middle-aged man he's given up. He's given up on everything. He knows the world's ending, but he's known, quote unquote, known the world's going to end for years. So he's been just racking up bills and doing all these decadent things. He talks about how he's had, threesomes, and
Had like birds' nests from China and all
Yeah.
this weird stuff.
all
Yeah.
this like incredibly because he just assumed the world's going to end. I'm just going to do whatever I want. He's had stomach cancer and did nothing about it, and just let it ravage his body because he was going to die anyway. And so why do anything? And then there's the kid that's in there who was completely clueless of the comet somehow, which that made me laugh at first when the guy's like, why are you even open? There's nobody going to be shopping. And then we quick snap cut to that kid in the background. He takes the headphones off, like, you were totally right. He's just there to buy music. But he has that hope. He has that hope he doesn't want to give up. And he literally lays out in the beginning of the movie what's going to happen at the end. And I love that. I always love when a movie can do that. Where he's like, no, it'll work out by some freak accident. There's a chance. But he's like, he doesn't give up on that. And so that's that punk rock attitude of like, I'm not going to give up, and I'm going to see it.
Which is why I think that store owner might be the kid from the Fish Story like restaurant scene, because like I could totally see him like having the faith that something's going to happen, and I'm just going to go to work. It's business hours. I'm going to do what I need to do. And I love that. It makes me love that even more.
Yeah, the more I think about it, the more I agree with that.
I love that they have these little like they don't overdo it. They don't get full Clerks. Like
No.
They have a couple conversations about punk rock itself. Like they have this very light conversation that if you know what they're talking about, you know what they're talking about, where they talk about the Sex Pistols cover of My Way.
Yeah.
Or Sid Vicious cover of My Way. And how this guy's being introduced to punk rock in general.
Yep.
And so it's like, oh, this is so cool. This is like a satire almost. And I didn't know this was punk rock. And I mean, I've heard people say that kind of thing. Oh, I didn't know this was what punk was.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's a whole other can of worms. But
yeah,
like it's fun to see that, like to see the active like engagement of someone trying to discover music in a film that's also trying to introduce you to music that never existed. It's really cool. And the fact that, again, this song kind of this movie lives and dies by how good the song is. And Fish Story is a banger.
It really is. All right, so fictional bands from movies or television shows.
Yep.
And now for me there's going to be just a touch of recency bias because the song is stuck in my head, but this is one of the best fictional bands songs in a thing that I can think of. Because I always think of like what was the band That Thing You Do? That's a great one because the Wonders were awesome, and the music was so good in that. The Oneaters. I think of the Wonders. I think of Spinal Tap. I think of what was in Almost Famous. What was the band in that?
Stillwater?
Yeah, that sounds right. The Soggy Bottom Boys. Danny Ora brings up in the chat. Soggy Bottom Boys. A Man of Constant Sorrow is such a good song.
That song slaps.
It really does.
I would say I'm blanking on what their name is, but Metalocalypse.
Oh yeah, Death Clock.
Death Clock. Yeah. One of my favorite fake bands of all time.
I was just having this conversation the other day because on Twitter somebody had put up the question of what are some of the best examples of a parody of a thing or a genre that becomes a good example of that thing. And one of mine was Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz, either one of those. Because I think Hot Fuzz is a fun action movie too. The way that that whole, but another one was Metalocalypse and Death Clock. Death Clock is a parody of black metal, death metal bands, but it's also a damn good death metal, black metal band.
Look, there's a reason Brandon Smalls was opening up for Mastodon.
Exactly. That's good stuff. So
I would also say Josie and the Pussycats from the 2001 film,
or the Archies. If you want to go back a ways, I mean, the Archies would be one. You could go with the Partridge Family is another band. I mean, might not be the type of music. The Monkees would be one I would put on my list.
No, but I actively liked the music they made for the Josie and the Pussycats 2000s film.
Yeah,
because they had oh gosh, what's her name from Letters to Cleo and Biff Naked doing the music. I know Kit Hanley.
Yes.
And that music is legit solid.
Yeah. I mean, I will put the Monkees on my list because I do love that music, and that group was created for that show.
Monkees, yeah.
Like the Monkees is great. There's so many of these really good, quote unquote fictional bands. Some of them go on to put out albums like the Monkees, like Death Clock or Spinal Tap. Some of them only exist. What was some of the bands in Scott Pilgrim versus the World? Some of that because the songs were so good.
Didn't Metric do one of the songs for one of the bands?
I think so. It's been a couple years since I've seen the movie, so I can't remember.
I at least think Emily Haynes wrote something for that thing. I'm not sure, but yeah, all the music in that movie is fantastic. But there's a good history of fake bands having really good music.
Yeah, and some of it is because you get good musicians working on the movie or the show or whatever it is, and they'll bring something out of it. Sometimes, you get like Danny Elfman involved in something, and he can bring his history to it, whatever it might be. But this is up there with one of the best ones. Certainly, they maybe only have the one song as the band. I think it was Fish Story.
I think the composer just made the song. So I don't know if there was an actual band that existed to create it, which is a little bit different than the people we brought up. But this is one of my favorites. I agree.
Really
this is such a cool song, and it's the fact that it captures an authentic sound that was developing at a specific time period so well, and this sounds weird, but realistically, I can see this actively happening. The way that they presented that story is in such a way that it would 100% make sense that some band did this that was unsung in Japan, which therefore meant that no one ever heard it a year before the Sex Pistols. I could 100% see that happening because, look, the Sex Pistols get a lot of credit for stuff they may or may not deserve, but the fact that there was something happening in rock and roll in the 70s at the time, there was something in the water, and
there was.
I don't think any single act gets credit, because you had television doing stuff. You had, and not only that, but you had like musicians like Chuck Berry doing stuff that was so punk rock at the time,
Oh yeah.
as we know it.
Oh yeah.
That I don't agree with the kind of the through thread that, oh, it starts with the Sex Pistols, because one, the Ramones formed a year before the Sex Pistols did, so there's that too.
Exactly.
But
Well,
I don't trust that whole thing, because the whole thing about punk rock was the fact that it was unorganized, and it was just a general reaction to what was going on at the time.
and we
And so to have that in Japan, it makes sense.
Yeah, and it seems like, or it feels like, a natural kind of flow that especially rock music has gone through these phases where in the early 70s everything was getting very esoteric, very overproduced. You had a lot like Led Zeppelin, who I love Led Zeppelin, but some of their later albums started getting very produced and very heavy, and you were getting a lot of progressive rock stuff and these kind of navel gazing and intricate, and then there was this sea change where younger kids were like, I don't want to listen to any of that crap, and like it's this organic thing with the Ramones. With so the song, according to IMDb trivia, again grain of salt, but they mentioned that it's kind of an improvisation on the riff from New Rose by the Damned, which was the first punk rock single in the UK, was New Rose. And I did go and listen to it earlier today, and it you can feel that DNA in there. So the Damned put out New Rose, and my guess is that the composer for this song listened to that and is like, that's perfect. Rework it a little bit, don't make it exactly the same, but similar structure, because it's a punk song, and it works perfectly. And then so I completely would buy that there was something like this going on in Japan at the same time, and because it was happening in the US and the UK at the same time, all over the place, because we saw the same thing happen 10, 20 years later, 10 or 15 years later, with kind of the grunge movement, right? Because rock throughout the 80s started getting more and more excessive, and you got more hair metal, and it kind of all became this thing. And then all of a sudden, in the late 80s is this organic kind of growing movement of stripping everything down and getting the sound getting all fuzzy and dirty and grimy, and you get the grunge movement. And then that whole thing goes through the 90s. And what happened in the early 2000s, we had the garage bands, we had the White Stripes, the all those bands that were the Hive, the Vines, kind of all growing at that same time.
The so-called like indie rock movement,
right?
You know, you had the Strokes and everything.
The Strokes were another one.
You also had you also had like the new pop punk explosion.
Yep.
From the basically the kids who were fed off of the Tony Hawk soundtrack from the mid '90s and the skate punk from the Southern Cal scene. And you say that's you get your Fall Out Boy, your Drive Thru Records bands, your Warped Tour scene, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you mentioned New Rose. So I'm watching the video now, and I'm like, oh, this is very much the vibe of that recording session.
And if you go back and look at that, and you go back and look at early Ramones stuff, you look at Black Flag from that sort of early 80s era, it all has that same feel, right? It's high energy. It's 3-4 guys on stage at the same time, in a tiny little stage, right? Because they're playing these little tiny venues, and like it's such that feel of early punk, and it just feels like that thing that was gonna happen, no matter what. There was no way to stop that.
I absolutely agree. And honestly, like the band stuff like reminds me of like my favorite like punk biopics. Like a lot of people gave it kind of some shade at the time because it had a specific named actor in it, but What We Do Is Secret, the Germs film, is really solid. Like, yes, it does play with reality a little bit, just like every biopic ever made does.
Right. Yeah.
But Shane West's performance as Darby Crash is phenomenal. So much so that the band was like, "Hey, we could tour with this guy," and they did. But some of the stuff when they're showing Darby actually recording gives me the same vibes of watching this band record. Like it's there's an authenticity to the music in this movie, even though the band never existed, that it's so important to the film's overall message. And the fact
Oh
that
yeah.
they got that part right just blows me away. And it's why this movie is one of my favorite movies. Like, it's in my top 10. I didn't want to say that like out the gate, but like it's one that like I always want to like push to people that I think might appreciate it, and I'm so happy that you liked it.
Hey,
And Drew
look,
was equally receptive, my co-host for The More You Nerd, and it just made me so happy that like I know that you were a music guy, but I couldn't remember like where you lied in your preferences.
I mean, I lean rock and roll. I lean, that's what I grew up listening to, rock and blues. And then I became a big metalhead when I was younger, and still listen to a
Okay,
lot of
cool.
metal now. But punk is always a part of that because it's like I got hooked on the Ramones and just ate that up and all that kind of stuff. But for me, like, I always hate the cop out answer of like I'd like everything, but I like good
I get it.
songs and I like good compositions, and so
Yeah,
you can find that in so many different ways. Now there are certainly
absolutely.
subgenres and styles that I don't care for. I don't like a lot of pop. Doesn't It's got to be a good. There are some pop songs that will hit for me, but on the
Yeah.
whole, the way pop is put together doesn't work for me. That's just my own.
I'm a Carly Rae Jepsen stan myself. Uh,
But I'll tell you what, man, I will get the T-shirts and I will help evangelize this movie with you, because I want to spread this to more people, just like I did with Amelie, just like I've done with a few of these surprise movies that I've gotten to see doing this show. This is one of those that's like, I feel like, don't let the fact that it is a Japanese film and it is subtitled stop you from watching it, because you're not losing anything there. And
it's so hypnotic.
it really is, and it's such a good movie, and it's one of those that I feel like you have to give a chance and then maybe even watch it a couple of times. I'm going to watch it a bunch
Mhm.
more because I know I'm going to get more out of it every time I watch it. I can already like tell that.
I mean, nothing makes me happier than to hear you say that, because this is a movie that I have kind of evangelized and I try to make people watch because, and that's what I love about your show. Because initially we were going to do something very, very different because I hadn't seen it, you hadn't seen it. And that would have been a fun experiment. But I also was like, you know what? I also want to make Travis watch this movie that means a lot to me that I'm pretty sure he hasn't seen. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about your show is like these accents can happen.
And it's the thing,
And
like, it's what got me to really start the show was my love of, I love this movie. I want to show it to you. And so the fact, like, I adore doing that. I love just getting somebody's reaction to a movie and showing them something new. So I completely understand how that can feel for you. And I like being on the receiving end of it too. I love that. I love this, like, wow, I never would have thought. When somebody brought up, it was like Sunset Boulevard, that, and it's a movie that's a classic, but it was like I never got around to watching it. It's an old movie. I don't know. I watched that and I was just like, this is amazing. I can't believe I slept
mean,
on this movie for so long. Like, why didn't I just watch it?
I was that way when I did the Big Lebowski on your show.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I had never seen Big Lebowski, and I mean that's a big one. Everyone's seen it a million times. I had never seen it, and I was honestly so happy to discover that I loved it as much as everyone else did. It was one of those wandering LA films that I'm super super into. Shane Black loves making those, and I love that he writes more of them. So I hope he continues to do so. But I'm so happy that you had the same reaction. I didn't want to preface this with like, oh yeah, this is in my top 10. Like I love this movie so much, and I didn't want to put any of that pressure on you.
I will say for me, it probably wouldn't have made a whole lot of difference in how it hit for me, but I'm also very glad that you did it that way, that you didn't front load me with anything going into this. So I got to kind of see it fresh. And the beauty of it is we've explained so much about this movie, and yet you're still like, you can watch it for that first time and you're not going to think of anything that we talked about, but the music, like, and it's so good that way. So yeah, this is absolutely, seek this out if you can find it. Like I say, it's on archive.org. I think I might, because it's archive.org, I think I might even throw the link to that in the show notes for this
Yeah, you
episode.
should. The Fish Story Blu-ray is not super hard to get a hold of. Amazon has it for looks like $18.12 and a $3.99 delivery fee. I can vouch for this release as long as it's this one by Third Window Films.
Okay.
It's worked on my Xbox and it works on my PlayStation, so I would assume it works on most American things. They had told me themselves that it says region B, but it will work anywhere.
Excellent.
I would imagine they probably have to say it's region B. I don't know if that's true about all of them, because the cool thing about that imprint is their whole thing is bringing weird genre Asian films to the West, specifically the UK. But I haven't bought any of their other releases, so I can't speak for that. But I can speak for this specific one, and it's far less expensive than when I bought the DVD from the library.
Excellent.
So
Definitely, though,
that.
search out this movie, Fish Story. Watch it. I think it's just worth your time. It's just such a fun movie, and there's so much that fierce hope is a perfect wording for that. Plus, you're gonna get a dope punk song stuck in your head. It's gonna be there. Yeah. It's gonna dig in there, and like I'm still like wanting to I want to go sit down at a drum kit and play that beat because it's just so good.
Yeah, it's so catchy.
I loved it.
It's a phenomenal song, and I think that's what ties the room together.
Mm-hmm.
This movie is phenomenal, but it's tied together by an excellent song, and that's what makes you root for everything. Like, it really would not have worked if the song wasn't as good as it was.
No, the song has to hit, and it does. And go watch it, and you're welcome. Because I really feel like anybody that watches this is just fun. It's good. It's warm. It's comforting. It really is. Now you've mentioned a couple times the show The More You Nerd. And I know that's a show you do with Drew, who was here just a couple weeks ago. And let people know about that show and kind of what you guys are working on.
Yeah, so right now we are in the middle of Ultramanuary, where we are kind of trying to give just a smattering of tastings of the franchise Ultraman. But yeah, we are a nerd show that is trying to expand our nerd horizons, and each month we do some sort of theme to review and experience things that we either haven't done before or someone has suggested us to do, and look at it from an objective lens, because we feel like there's too much negativity on the internet, and we want to look at things just purely as they are. Mm-hmm. And if something exists, why someone loves it. And so, yeah, right now we're doing Ultraman, and it's been a blast. We both recently did the Shin Ultraman theatrical experience and had a great time.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I've been a Tokusatsu fan for a while, because I'm a Power Rangers person. So I got into Super Sentai, and offhand we just decided to do a Kamen Rider month recently in November, and Drew got hooked on Kamen Rider.
Boy, did he ever.
And I mean, for good reason. Kamen Rider is excellent. I was blown away by how good it was, because I only knew it as Master Rider in the States from when I was a kid, mm-hmm. and had never gone back to revisit. And so when we went back and we did the original series, Kamen Rider Black, Kuga, and Gaim, because I'm a big fan of Kamen Rider Gaim. First Aid or X Aid. Had an absolute blast, and some of the best like on-screen superhero television I've ever seen. But yeah, I mean, that's what we do every month. We just review nerd stuff and have a great time.
And it's so much fun. I love the show because of just you and Drew, your energy and what you bring. The idea of like, you will say when something is not any good, or there's things that you don't like, but you never do it in a mean-spirited way, and it's always a very positive show, which, as somebody who also tries to do a very positive show, I appreciate that wholeheartedly. Plus, you did an entire month on John Candy in December, and so...
Yeah, so that was, weirdly enough, a suggestion by Drew's wife, but, like, John Candy has meant so much to me, mm-hmm. for my entire life. So getting to spend a month doing his stuff, and then especially spending some time with his SCTV work, which I didn't have a lot of experience with since I was a kid. Like, I think that John Candy is one of the best people to spend your time on. Like, every story you read about him just seems to be like wholesome and great, and
Yeah.
his energy in any film just lights up the entire room.
I have put it on my list of I need to find somebody who hasn't seen The Great Outdoors just so I can watch it again and talk to somebody about it, because I love that movie so much and it's such a big part of my childhood.
I mean, I'll pretend not to see it, and I'll do it with you.
I mean, we'll just talk off air about The Great Outdoors, because that movie, amazing.
It's great.
But yeah, it's just a fun show. The More You Nerd is a fun show. I've been on it a couple times. I'm actually going through things I want to try and pitch you guys to get myself back on there, because
we'd love to have you back. Yeah,
always
absolutely.
love being.
And also, thank you so much. This past summer, you did like an impromptu appearance on our live riffing feed to watch Velocipaster. And when you popped in the chat room, I was like, Drew, Travis is in here. Let's get Travis on here. Like, there's no reason he shouldn't be. And thank you so much. That was a lot of fun.
I had a blast. That was the perfect way for me to watch Velocipaster, and I just had a fun time. Oh man, so are they doubling the budget for this? Is it going to be $24?
Probably not. Probably not.
We're going to triple the cardboard budget. It's $1.50. Oh, sounds good. Love it. Yeah, but like, you and Drew are wonderful guests to have on here. I love having you guys on, and you're some of my favorite people just doing podcasts, because you bring just a great energy to it. So thank you for being here this week. And
thank you. I mean, we feel the exact same way about you.
And sincerely, thank you for suggesting this movie, because I was just blown away by how much I enjoyed this. The more I think about it, the better it gets too, which is the fun part.
Honestly, the best thing that you could have said was that. Like, it makes me so happy that you enjoyed it as much as you did. Like, that is the best gift.
And for me, for a movie that has no clips to get, because everything's in Japanese, so like playing audio clips of that's going to do nothing for an English language show. That says something, by the way. So I had a blast with this movie. And thank you so much for being here this week. We'll definitely get you, Andrew, back again. And I'm working on some ideas of some stuff for More You Nerds. So I'll let you know.
Love to have you.
Excellent. Well, this show records Sunday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern time at twitch.tv/TVsTravis. You can hang out live and be in the chat with Phelan, Daniora, Ace, and just enjoy what goes on. And then Wednesdays, it comes out as a podcast everywhere you get your podcasts, or head on over to the newly redesigned tvstravis.com, and you can find the show there, where you can also find merchandise or Patreon link for this show, where you can support the show for as little as $1 an episode. As well, also ratings and reviews on your podcatcher, huge for the show, makes it more discoverable. I love that and appreciate it. And I just appreciate all of you out there listening. Thank you so much for helping to keep me doing this for 200 plus episodes. I can't believe I just did my 200th episode not that long ago, and we're just going to keep going. So next week, I've got Theo from, I know his show, but I can't think of the title of it now. He was a contestant on America's Next Top Podcaster this past season. We are going to watch a movie called No Escape. And I haven't seen it before, but it's Martin Campbell directed, and it stars Ray Liotta. And so I'm kind of hooked, because Martin Campbell is the director of two of my favorite James Bond movies of all time, GoldenEye and Casino Royale. So I'm looking forward to this. It's going to be fun. That's next week, is called No Escape. And then coming up as well, I've also got, I'm going to be showing somebody Howard the Duck for the first time. I can't wait for that. That's going to be a trip. And in a couple of weeks, Tom Merritt's going to come on, and we're going to talk about Titanic. So that should be fun too. He's never seen Titanic. I can't wait to hear the story of how, just how you hadn't seen it. So we'll see. But that's what's coming up here. But Myles, truly, thank you for being here this week. This was a blast. always
I
it's
had the
always
best time.
fun, but man, this was like something extra this week. So
I'm so happy that you love this as much as I do. So it thank you.
and we'll definitely be people check out The More You Nerd. It's super super fun. So until next time, remember to enjoy your movies, and it's 2023. Let's be excellent to each other. This is like pretty much all I could find for a little stinger clip because there was just nothing.